The sky split open the day they arrived. It started with a ripple in the atmosphere, a distortion that sent birds scattering and set off every sensor on Earth's defense networks. Then the warships came, massive, sleek, and predatory. They hovered over major cities like silent sentinels, darkening the streets below with their sheer size. People poured into the streets, necks craned, staring in a mixture of awe and terror. At first, there was no sound, no weapons fired, no hostile actions, just an overwhelming presence, an unspoken declaration that whoever had arrived did not consider us their equals. The silence was somehow worse than an outright attack. Then, every screen, every device, every form of communication flickered and went black. A moment of eerie stillness passed before they returned, not with familiar broadcasts, but with a single imposing image. She stood tall, framed by the backdrop of a throne room aboard one of those massive ships, violet-skinned, golden-eyed, draped in armor that shimmered under the alien light. Her expression was one of thinly veiled amusement, like a queen watching a court jester fumble for entertainment. "I am High Commander Serethis of the Valkyrie Dominion," she said, her voice clear, unwavering, and laced with disdain. "We have watched your world, we have studied your people, and we are disappointed." A murmur spread through the streets, people glancing at one another, confusion and unease rising in equal measure. "We had hoped to find warriors here," Serethis continued, her golden gaze sweeping over us as if she could see every person watching. "A people worthy of respect, of challenge, but instead we find a world of soft creatures, weak men, fragile women, a race that has never known true battle, only petty conflicts among themselves." The murmur turned to outrage. People shouted at the screens, fists raised, though none of it mattered to the alien woman who couldn't hear them. "We have conquered empires that spanned the stars," Serethis went on, unbothered. "We have faced true warriors, beings who understood the price of survival. And yet here you are, living in your cities, squabbling over trivial things, growing fat and complacent under the illusion of peace." I stood among the crowd, listening, fists clenched. It wasn't fear that ran through me in that moment. It was anger, a deep, burning fury at the arrogance dripping from her every word. The Valkyrie thought they were better than us. They thought we were nothing. "Surrender now," Serethis offered, "and perhaps we shall allow some of you to serve." At the transmission cut, silence fell again, thick and heavy. But this time it wasn't the silence of fear. It was something else, something dangerous. Because she was wrong about one thing. We knew war, and she was about to find out exactly what Earth's people were made of. The world's leaders scrambled. Within hours of the Valkyrie's broadcast, every major government was in crisis mode, debating responses, strategies, and, most importantly, how to avoid outright annihilation. The problem wasn't just their arrival, it was their attitude. The Valkyrie didn't see us as a threat, they didn't even see us as equals. They mocked Earth, dismissed its people, and, worst of all, they didn't think we could fight. It wasn't just political leaders who were outraged. The military was in an uproar. Soldiers, generals, and tacticians pored over every detail of the Valkyrie's message, looking for weaknesses. Could we fight them? Did we stand a chance? The answer wasn't clear. We had weapons, nuclear, biological, and technological arsenals that could wipe out cities. But the Valkyrie had warships, the kind that could hover in our skies without fear, carrying weapons we didn't even understand. A conventional war would be suicide. And then Serethis made her challenge. We grow bored waiting for an answer. Her voice crackled across the world's networks again. "Send us your finest champion, a warrior, a male if you dare. We shall test him against one of our own." The insult was obvious. A test? Not a war, not a full-scale battle. Just a test. It was a slap in the face to every soldier, every fighter, every person on Earth who had ever shed blood in combat. They weren't asking for negotiations. They were asking us to entertain them. Governments hesitated, the military debated, who would they send? Special forces operators, trained in the deadliest arts of combat, were considered. Names were floated. Men with records so impressive they were practically legends. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. It wouldn't matter. The Valkyrie were bigger, stronger, faster. Their physiology alone gave them a massive advantage. Every simulation, every tactical breakdown led to the same grim conclusion. No man on Earth, no matter how skilled, could physically match a Valkyrie warrior. The world watched, waiting for a decision. And then, before they could make one, I stepped forward. Not because I was the strongest, not because I was the smartest, but because, in that moment, as I stood among the crowd watching the news, something inside me snapped. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a trained fighter. I was just a man, a factory worker, someone who'd spent years doing back-breaking labor, fighting in bars on the weekends, and scraping by in a world that didn't hand out victories easily. I had nothing to lose. So, when the recruitment station opened its doors looking for volunteers, I walked in. And somehow, some way, I convinced them to let me go. The moment my name was announced as Earth's champion, the world erupted. The news called it suicide. The Valkyrie laughed. And Serathis? She just smirked, as if she already knew how this would end. The moment I stepped aboard their ship, I knew I was in over my head. The air was heavier, charged with something that felt almost alive. The walls were sleek, dark metal, glowing with pulsing lines of violet energy that ran like veins through the corridors. Everything was precise, built for function over aesthetics. There was no decoration, no unnecessary comfort, only the cold efficiency of a people bred for war. 2 Valkyrie warriors escorted me, their towering forms flanking me like living statues. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me beyond making sure I didn't try anything stupid. Not that I planned to. There was nowhere to run. The corridor opened into something far larger, a coliseum. That was the only way to describe it. A massive, open arena surrounded by tiers of seats, filled with Valkyrie warriors, all watching, all waiting. Their voices were a steady hum of conversation, low and growling, filled with amusement and interest. At the far end of the arena, seated on an elevated throne, was her, High Commander Serathis. She watched me with that same smirk she always wore, as if she had already decided this fight would be nothing more than a fleeting distraction. "You are Earth's champion?" she asked, her voice carrying effortlessly through the chamber. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her fist. "This is unexpected?" I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to say. The challenge had already been made. Across the arena, a door hissed open. My opponent stepped forward. She was huge, easily a foot taller than me, her body a masterpiece of muscle and precision. Her violet skin gleamed under the artificial lighting, her armor minimal, designed more for mobility than defense. Her white hair was tied back in a braid, and her golden eyes studied me with something between amusement and mild interest. The crowd murmured as she stepped forward, rolling her shoulders. She wasn't just some random warrior. She was one of their best. "Ulm round," Serathis announced, her voice laced with amusement. "Survive, and we will reconsider our judgment of your world." The crowd laughed. They already knew the outcome. The warrior woman tilted her head, cracking her neck, then raised her fists. No weapons, no armor, just raw, unfiltered combat. The ground beneath us rumbled as the fight began. She was fast, faster than I expected, faster than any human. She closed the distance between us in a blink, her first strike coming straight for my ribs. I dodged, barely. The air whistled as her fist sailed past me, missing by an inch. If that had landed, I would have been done. But I didn't try to meet her strength with strength. I had never been the strongest man in the room. I had only ever been the smartest fighter. And that was going to be the difference between life and death. She came at me again, relentless, a blur of violent muscle and speed. Her fists moved like sledgehammers, and even her misses stirred the air with enough force to make my skin sting. The crowd roared, eager for the inevitable moment when she would flatten me against the arena floor. But I had grown up in fights I wasn't supposed to win. I ducked under a vicious right hook, stepping to the side just as her momentum carried her forward. She expected resistance, a block, maybe even an attempt to match her strength. Instead, I did what I always did when fighting someone bigger and stronger. I let her own power betray her. She stumbled just for a half second, but that was all I needed. I drove my fist into her ribs, twisting at the last moment to put every ounce of weight behind it. It wasn't enough to drop her, but it was enough to make her hesitate. That alone was a victory. The crowd's roar faltered. This wasn't what they expected. She recovered quickly, golden eyes narrowing. Now there was something new in them, not just amusement, but calculation. She had assumed I was weak. Now she was reassessing. "You fight like a cornered animal," she muttered. "You fight like someone who's never lost a fight in her life," I shot back. "That's the difference." Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then she lunged again. She adjusted this time, learning, adapting. But so did I. I didn't try to match her blows. I moved. I dodged. I feinted. I thought my way through the fight, taking in every shift in her stance, every pattern in her attacks. She was used to domination, used to ending fights in seconds. I stretched it out, made her work for every step, every hit, every attempt to break me. I took my share of hits. A glancing blow to my shoulder that numbed my entire arm, a grazing kick that sent fire up my ribs. But I stayed on my feet. The longer I lasted, the quieter the crowd became. She drove forward, aiming for a knockout blow. I sidestepped at the last moment, tripping her leg mid-step. She stumbled, just enough for me to drive my fist into her jaw. She reeled, blinking in shock. And that was when I knew the fight wasn't about strength. It wasn't about skill. It was about something the Valkyrie had never considered. Adaptability. I grinned through bloody teeth. "What's wrong?" I asked, breathing hard. "Not as easy as you thought." The warrior woman straightened, rolling her shoulders. Then she did something that made the entire arena go silent. She gave me a short, sharp nod. Respect. Up on her throne, Serathis leaned forward, golden eyes burning with newfound interest. For the first time, the Valkyrie were starting to pay attention. Serathis rose from her throne, the slow, deliberate movement drawing every eye in the arena. The murmuring crowd fell into a hushed silence, warriors shifting uneasily as they processed what had just happened. I was still breathing. I was still standing. My opponent, the Valkyrie fighter who had walked into this match expecting an effortless victory, was standing too. But there was a difference now, a shift in the air between us. She no longer looked at me like an insect beneath her boot. She studied me like a puzzle she hadn't quite figured out yet. Serathis descended from her throne, each step an echo in the vast chamber. When she reached the arena floor, she didn't look at her warrior first. She looked at me. "You fight differently." Her voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was measured, thoughtful. I wiped the blood from my lip and shrugged. That's what happens when you spend your whole life fighting people bigger than you. Her golden eyes studied me, weighing something unseen. She gestured toward my opponent. You were not stronger than her. You were not faster. And yet, you landed a strike that many of our own warriors would have failed to deliver. It's not always about strength, I said. Cerathus's expression flickered, just for a moment. Then she turned back to the crowd. We expected an easy victory, she called out, her voice carrying through the chamber. We expected weakness. Instead, we have witnessed something unexpected. A low murmur rippled through the gathered warriors. The tone had changed. Before, they had been laughing, jeering, waiting for my inevitable defeat. Now, they were watching with something else entirely. What is it that makes you fight this way? Cerathus asked, her gaze sharp. Your people, your men, are smaller than us. We assumed that meant lesser, and yet you move in ways that defy expectation. You fight without relying on brute force. You use adaptability. I exhaled, rolling my sore shoulder. It's simple, I said. On Earth, if you're not the strongest, you have to be the smartest. You have to be quicker, meaner, and more unpredictable. We've been fighting each other for centuries. Strength alone doesn't win wars. Cunning does. Cerathus was silent for a moment, and then, to my absolute shock, she smiled. Not a mocking smirk, not a sneer, something different. Perhaps we misjudged your people, she admitted, and the weight of those words sent another ripple through the arena. The Valkyrie had come expecting to conquer. Instead, they had found something they had never truly accounted for. Cerathus turned back to her warriors. The men of Earth are not as weak as we believed. And just like that, everything changed. Because when a conqueror starts to respect the conquered, the war they came for may not happen at all. The war never came. Not in the way we had feared. The Valkyrie didn't open fire, didn't send their warriors to storm our cities or burn our world to the ground. Instead, they did something no one had expected. They stayed. Not as invaders, not as conquerors, but as observers. At first it was unsettling. The massive warships still loomed over our cities. But now, instead of threats, they sent emissaries. Instead of ultimatums, they asked questions. And to my surprise, one of those questions was directed at me. Cerathus requested a private meeting. I was brought aboard the Valkyrie flagship again, though this time there was no coliseum, no jeering crowd. I stood in a chamber lined with metallic banners, surrounded by towering warrior women who watched me with open curiosity instead of disdain. Cerathus sat upon her throne, but the way she regarded me now was different. No arrogance, no amusement, just interest. You are not the strongest among your people, she said, her voice thoughtful. Not the fastest, not the most deadly, and yet you changed everything in a single fight. I shifted, still sore from that fight. Guess you didn't expect a guy like me to last that long. No, she admitted, we did not. She stood, stepping closer, hands clasped behind her back. The other Valkyrie in the room watched, silent, waiting. Your world is unorthodox, Cerathus continued. We assumed your men were weak because they lacked physical superiority. But strength is not the only way to win a battle. You taught us that. That was the real reason we were standing here, wasn't it? They hadn't just seen a single human man put up a good fight. They had realized something about humanity itself. We have faced countless species, Cerathus went on. Warriors who fight with honor, beasts who fight with instinct, armies who fight with overwhelming force. But you, her golden eyes locked onto mine, you fight like survivors. I let out a slow breath. That's because we are. Humans weren't the strongest in the galaxy. We weren't the fastest, we weren't the most advanced, but what we were, what we had always been, was adaptable. We do not ally with the weak, Sarathis said, tilting her head, but we do respect the strong, and strength comes in many forms. She turned to her warriors, her voice rising. We came to conquer. Instead, we have found something we did not expect, a world that has earned our respect. The warriors murmured, glancing at one another. It wasn't resistance. It was acceptance. Saratus turned back to me, that small, knowing smile still lingering. Perhaps Earth is not so weak after all. I grinned, told you so, and just like that, the galaxy changed forever. The Valkyrie didn't leave, not as invaders, not as conquerors, but as something unexpected. They called it a diplomatic occupation, though that was just a fancy way of saying they had decided to stay and learn. Their warships no longer loomed over our cities like an executioner's blade. Instead, their warriors walked among us, observing, studying, testing. And to my utter disbelief, some of them started fighting alongside us. It started in the military. The Valkyrie respected warriors above all else, and once they realized Earth had plenty of those, they took an interest. Special Forces units found themselves sparring with alien women who could break bones with a single punch. At first, the matches were brutal. Humans couldn't match them in sheer power, but that wasn't the point. The Valkyrie weren't just watching for strength. They were watching for the way humans thought about battle. I was dragged into this mess more than once. After my fight in the arena, I had somehow become the unspoken example of Earth's unorthodox fighting style. Valkyrie warriors would seek me out, challenging me in controlled matches, studying how I moved, how I endured. I lost more fights than I won, but that wasn't the point. The fact that I kept getting up was what fascinated them. You should be broken by now, one of them told me after our third match. Yet you fight as if losing is not an option. Because it's not, I had replied simply, and that was when I saw it. That flicker of realization in her golden eyes, that slow, dawning respect. It didn't stop at the military. The Valkyrie's presence began shifting in ways no one had anticipated. Some of their warriors started integrating into human society. You'd see them in training camps, in tactical discussions, even in bars. Towering alien women who once looked at humanity with scorn, now choosing to spend time among us. The first time I saw a Valkyrie sharing a drink with a group of human soldiers, laughing at some crude joke, I realized something incredible was happening. The Valkyrie had arrived expecting submission. Instead, they had found something they hadn't even known they were looking for. Your people do not just fight, Sarathis told me one night aboard her warship overlooking the Earth. You endure. You survive. That is a kind of strength we have never truly understood. I looked at her, the once arrogant high commander who had mocked Earth, now standing beside me, arms crossed, thoughtful. And now? I asked. Saratus exhaled slowly. Now, we learn. And that was how humanity won. Not with war, not with weapons, but with the one thing the Valkyrie never expected. The unbreakable will of Earth's people. The lesson ended, but no one moved. The students sat in stunned silence, their gazes fixed on me, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and growing horror. Some looked pale, others fidgeted nervously, and a few, those who had studied war long enough to understand its deepest truths, wore the grim realization of what I had just told them. Jokana, the Yale Ferry student who had first asked the question, swallowed hard. But that doesn't make sense, she said, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her own doubt. Humans don't seem dangerous at all. They don't act like conquerors. They don't impose their will on others. If they're as terrifying as you say, why haven't they taken over the galaxy? A reasonable question, one that had haunted the minds of the greatest strategists for generations. I clasped my hands behind my back and let the silence stretch before answering. Because they don't want to, I said simply. She blinked, confused. But they never did, I continued. That is what makes them different. Every empire in history has fought wars for dominance, for power, for survival. But humans do not fight for conquest. They fight to end the fight. When they go to war, it is not to win. It is to make sure their enemy can never threaten them again. I stepped forward, scanning the faces of my students. Tell me, what do you think the Uroth feared the most in the final days before their empire fell? A few students exchanged nervous glances. One of the Ulzar hesitated before clicking out an answer. Defeat? No, I said. Their greatest fear was mercy. Confusion rippled through the room. I could see their minds working, struggling to grasp the meaning of my words. The Uroth expected slaughter. They were ready to fight to the last soldier, to throw everything they had into a glorious last stand, I said. But that is not what humanity gave them. Instead, the humans dismantled them, piece by piece, with an efficiency that defied comprehension. They destroyed everything that made the Uroth who they were, not just their military, but their infrastructure, their leadership, their very identity. They erased them from history. No war monuments, no martyrdom, no legacy, just nothing. A shiver ran through the room. They could have burned the Uroth homeworld to glass, I continued, my voice low. They could have exterminated them to the last. But they didn't. Instead, they let them live. A few scattered remnants, broken, nameless, wandering the galaxy with no purpose, no homeland, no future. They left them alive because that was a far worse punishment than death. Silence. Finally, Yelkana spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. And if humanity ever goes to war again, I exhaled slowly, looking at my students, the future leaders of the galaxy. Then there will be no remnants, I said. There will be nothing left at all.